So anyway, that is now recording in progress. Okay, let's just see if we can do the other thing. No. Okay, Laura, wonderful to have you here, and thank you so much for agreeing to come and have this one-to-one conversation with us for the Digital Score project. I posed a question to you as a kind of departure theme for us to discuss today, which was how can we understand togetherness in ensemble performances with collaborative, interactive, intelligent digital scores? And I kind of wondered where you might like to start with that as a initial Kickstarter.
Yes, well, thank you for posing such a nice and interesting question. I do kind of have a few sub-questions that I think we can go through to eventually address this big question. And probably the most important place to start is by talking about what we actually mean when we're talking about musical togetherness.
Yeah.
For me, when I'm talking about musical togetherness, I'm talking about the socially rewarding experiences that come up, that arise when we are interacting musically with other people. So it's experiences of musical alignment and social connection. And they're positive experiences. So positive experiences for the people who are feeling strongly together. And in the case of traditional music ensembles that are involving instruments, traditional instruments, voices, and so forth, I would say that musical togetherness tends to be an embodied experience. So it's experienced as actually shared rhythms in breathing, in body motion, in attention and emotion. And this is something that I have been looking at in some of my research. So most of my research is looking at ensemble playing, different sorts of ensembles with different sorts of musicians. Much of the time I'm looking at actually classically trained ensembles. So these are people who are playing acoustic instruments and have been highly trained to play acoustic instruments in close alignment with each other. And if you ask these musicians what it means to be together with their ensemble partners, they talk about breathing together and feeling a shared emotion and feeling a shared tempo. Of course, there's specific comments about synchronizing and having coherence and dynamics and so forth. But these references to the body, and the rhythms of the body tend to be quite prominent in these discussions. And so I would say then, this is an active research question for me, the question of how these different bodily rhythms actually do relate to togetherness. So much of my experiments are, so they're empirical experiments, and they're involving people playing music, different types of music under different types of conditions. And I'm looking actually at the rhythms of their body, looking at how they're moving, how they're breathing and so forth. And I'm looking to relate the strength of coordination in those rhythms between people to the strength of togetherness that they tell me that they feel.
Okay, well, that's a wonderful introduction to it. Yeah, that is fantastic, and lots to chew on there as well.
Yes.
I'm particularly drawn to the embodied relationship that's in there, and from what you were saying there, there's a kind of a predominance of the physical presence that is there.
Yes.
But I just wonder if they also are aware of how the nature of self and others is represented inside the sonic realm, as sound, and whether or not it's a purely, ocular-centric, feeling of togetherness, or whether or not actually they sense the presence of the other human, even with eyes closed or being co-located or something like that. Wonder if there's anything that emerges out of that.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, of course. And actually some of the experiments that I have run have looked in some way at this. one of the things that I often manipulate is actually whether they can see each other, or how directly they're able to look at each other. And so this is kind of testing to what extent experiences of musical togetherness are necessarily multimodal, to what extent it can exist entirely in the sonic realm, in particular for people who are used to seeing each other as they play. So that's maybe a little strange for some of them. But I would say that in the people that I speak to and in the results of the experiment, the auditory experience is, of course, highly prominent. I think in some ways it's almost unspoken. So if you ask many of the people that we have asked to make written responses, for example, about what they're feeling when they're feeling together, some of them won't mention actually the sound, which is, it's surprising, isn't it? Because it's all, music is about the sound, but it seems to be something that's given in some way.
Indeed, I think it's immensely difficult to try and find the words or the, without reaching for fluffy metaphors, to describe who it is or what it is that you are aware of, their presence that you're aware of, as sound within sound. I mean, I know it does happen. That's where our point of engagement. We're not mechanically looking for, kind of movements of a bow and trying to judge
Right.
where it is. We are, I would have thought that we are driven by that, but it's trying to find a language for that is really tricky. So how do people, how have your participants negotiated that? Have they been willing to enter into metaphorical discussions, or do they feel it's nice, safe ground when they talk about the kind of visual connections that they have?
Well, I would say many of them kind of speak about it a little bit more abstractly. So as I said, that there are people who are making these very specific references to motion or breathing. But many of them are talking more generally about tempo or about dynamics or about phrasing, which is something that is for them multimodal, right? And so it's not necessary to really talk about which modality or modalities are being used to access this. It's really a more I don't know, coherent experience, bringing all of these senses together.
There was 2 points you made very early on, just at the start there, where you said it's socially rewarding, and you mentioned the 2 points: the kind of close musical alignment, and within there the kind of physical sensation of cooperating together, and that chimes in with the social connection as well. Actually, no, the musical alignment I think is more to do with, well, what do you mean by close musical alignment in that? Is that the tempo? Is that the articulation? Is that the phraseology and the those aspects of music?
Well, it can be those specific things, but more generally it's having some sort of shared musical idea or musical experience. This depends quite a lot on the sort of music that people are playing, to what extent they would define very specific goals or things that they want to achieve, and therefore by monitoring for these goals can see how aligned they are. So in some cases it's really more of an idea or a character that they feel that they are sharing. And in other cases, for example, in the case of most classical ensembles, then yeah, it's tempo and it's synchronizing notes very precisely, and it's not necessarily matching each other in dynamics or articulation, but doing something that is complementary to each other.
Do you think they have maybe a tacit understanding of what, or maybe not so tacit, quite an explicit understanding of what success feels like when they are collectively playing the piece at that point? Do they do you feel there is a kind of cultural understanding amongst them, amongst the ensembles, especially established ensembles? I'm thinking of a string quartet or something like that that have been playing for a while, where there is this, they grow and develop a sense of what a successful rendition of a particular piece might be. And is it that their communal contribution to making this successful object is that part of this kind of musical alignment that is rewarding for them?
Yes, I suppose especially those who have been training together for a long period of time, they should have a very similar idea of what they want to achieve with the music, sort of what sort of style they want to play in, and musically what they want to accomplish. And this is the musical idea that they try to feel aligned with, I think.
But
for example, we yeah, sorry.
No, go on. You carry on. You carry on. Your example sounded much more interesting than what I was going to say.
Well, we have done an experiment with the Danish string quartets a little more than a year ago, and these are world-class classical musicians who have actually been playing together for more than a decade, I guess, at least maybe a couple of decades. They actually grew up playing together, so they developed their musical sensitivity kind of in parallel with each other. And so this is a very interesting case to look at when we're trying to see how closely aligned different musicians, different individuals need to be to feel collectively as though they have succeeded in playing something cohesive.
You talked about it being an embodied experience. I wonder if it's also an emotional experience as well. That you could, of course, break it down to the accuracy of, kind of the sequencing of notes and the alignment to the kind of shared tempo and the chronos that is agreed through it. But actually, out of that comes an emotional joy and satisfaction. And do you get a sense that they want to talk about that? It's at that level.
Yeah, this is something that is very much at the forefront of what musicians would want to talk about when you're asking them what it means to be together. They're often talking about sharing an emotion or exchanging an emotion, or they talk about both expressing the same emotion as each other, but also sharing themselves, experiencing the same or a similar emotion.
I'm aware of time, of course. I know you've got some sub areas to talk about, but I just want to dig a little bit deeper here and replace one of those musicians with an intelligent score system. So what I mean by that is a digital score, so a musical idea packaged within a hardware, software type thing, the next stage from the piece of paper with the lines and dots, and it's something that is listening, something that might be feeling, if you want, is perceptually aware of the humans and how they are moving, and is adjusting its responses or creating a response in the moment there and then for them. I wonder what does that need to do in order to offer the human musicians this rewarding social sense of togetherness?
That is actually the next question, really, that I wanted to talk about.
There you go.
You're predicting this very well. What I had in mind to talk about is kind of defining a minimal architecture that would be needed for people to experience togetherness in different types of ensembles, including those where they're playing from a digital score. And so the idea here is kind of to identify the elements that I would tentatively propose might be necessary to exist as part of the context of the performance in order for people to feel togetherness, either with each other, with the other humans that they are playing with, or in some cases with the audience, or with actually a collaborative score or accompaniment partner or whatever it is that
Yep.
has been provided for the performance. And
Go
so
for it.
I would kind of say that the first very basic thing that I would propose is that people need to be able to distinguish between their own sound that they are producing and the sound that others are producing. And so in the literature, this is referred to as self-other segregation.
Yes.
And it's discussed quite at length as a cognitive process in which we are really automatically able to pair the effects of our own actions with those actions and distinguish that from what others are doing. And of course, in the case of traditional instruments, this is happening on the basis of timing. So the effects of the action are happening quite close to the production of the action in time. And also there's similarity in congruency. So if you're putting more force into your action, for example, you expect to hear a louder sound. And this, I think, is perhaps or can be a challenge for digital scores. So I think there could be situations where the sound of the person who is playing may be temporarily misaligned to what they are doing, and perhaps this is part of the point of the score. And there can also be situations perhaps where the actions that the person is carrying out and the effects that their actions have are not reliably related, or this might be the case for multiple people who are playing together. And this then, if you are not reliably able to distinguish between your sound and somebody else's sound, I would say that this poses a problem for actually communicating with the people that you are playing with, or communicating with the audience. But I was especially thinking of cases where you're trying to communicate either with the score itself or with other people. And this communication, real-time communication between the people or entities that are contributing to the performance, I would say, is one of the most critical things for allowing experiences of togetherness to arise. And I would emphasize that this needs, sorry, yeah?
No, I was just going to, you're probably going to answer it in your emphasis, but I'm just wondering if that's because if this is not reliably related, then it's not part of a social construct, or they struggle or maybe spend a lot of time seeking out to draw in meaning into the kind of the social situation. So if this thing is mute, or its actions, I'm talking about, let's say, an intelligent digital score, if it's mute to what is happening, therefore it's not reliably responding, it's dislocated, that's going to splinter some kind of social togetherness. Or if it's doing something in response that's just a little bit too weird or abstract, then again the human is less likely to find meaning within it, and then therefore less likely to draw that into a sense of togetherness, because it'd be that thing over there and me over here. There'd be that social split.
Yeah, this is basically exactly what I'm thinking about. Without this really precise real-time communication, the social situation really falls apart. And so I would stress here is that the communication needs to be real-time. And I think this is also something that you stress in the book in the context of liveness, when you're talking about liveness, that liveness is really coming from simultaneity in what is going on between the actions and between the sounds and the responses between whoever is contributing to the performance. And of course, the precision of the real time depends on the sort of music that's being played. But the fact that
even so, I think even if it is something that requires a very tight rhythmical matrix like Bach or kind of popular music or something like that,
Mhm.
regardless of that accuracy within the temporal matrix, there's still a feeling of liveness and togetherness that is above and beyond that accuracy. Kind of the construct of the music, is only part of it. The construction of the music is only part of that sense of liveness that I talk about in then. But there are other things, presence for one thing, and the perceptual characteristics of and the behaviour of the scores, which I believe can offer an insight or offer a glimmer of hope for the musicians that this thing is with them, is live together.
Yeah, I think so. I would comment on two things. One, you mentioned presence, and I think this is also very closely related to communication and the importance of the different contributors to the interaction having the ability to communicate. Because when you can communicate, then you can express something.
Yeah.
And when you can express something, then you show to others that you have some sort of intentions, whether those are programmed intentions or human intentions is a different question.
If I'm sorry to railroad you, you did invite me into to kind of have a conversation.
I did.
You've mentioned communicate a few times, and I just wondered within the concept. Let's put a hypothetical situation that you've got a digital score that is running some artificial intelligence in the background. It is listening, it is aware, it is live in real time, and it is made present by simply, kind of putting the next bar of the score or the next beat of the score on the screen, and perhaps even making an accompaniment to it. So it's got that kind of feedback loop there. In order for it to have presence and reliably, kind of related and all of that lot, you mentioned communicate a couple of times. I just wondered what, given we're talking about kind of together, a sense of togetherness, what might it need to communicate this digital score to the solo human who's working with it?
Well, in this case, I would say is an interesting borderline case in which we are really testing what minimally is needed for a person to experience togetherness. And the system that you are describing to me does not sound as though it offers that much actually to the person, because it doesn't seem that it's changing the content of the music necessarily, if it's score following effectively. So it's responding, it's showing that it's responding in terms of that it's following the person's timing. If it's playing some sort of accompaniment, I guess there's a question of whether the accompaniment is musically being responsive to the person in terms of parameters other than timing. So is it scaling its dynamics to meet the person? Is it matching its phrasing to the person? These are, of course, very computationally difficult things to achieve.
But only gets us so far towards a sense of togetherness, as you wonderfully defined it at the beginning of this talk, about the fact that there is some musical alignment that I think goes beyond precision and an accuracy of timing. I think
yes, I would guess that in this case, many people actually would not feel much togetherness with the score that they're playing with. Perhaps this depends a little bit on the individual and their expectations and how much personality sort of they are willing to assign to a system that's not giving them that much.
I set this up as a failed example. I knew there wouldn't be much togetherness, even though it's presence, it's listening live, it's so it's got all of those. It's not emotionally connecting on a musical level with the human. It's quite a didactic robot in that sense, that it's just delivering stuff, even if it is live and present. So
yes.
So how could we modify that then to offer the human a deeper sense of togetherness?
I would suggest sort of three hierarchical things, kind of increasing in difficulty and complexity. The first, so we have in this case, the score is being responsive to the person in terms of the timing, but not musically responsive to them. And so sort of the first base level of change that could be made here is to have the system following the person who's playing across other musical dimensions, and yeah, dynamics, articulation, and so forth. And so this would take us a little bit further towards a togetherness experience. But I think we kind of need to go a little bit further than that and have some sort of agreement. We can talk about it in terms of shared goals, shared musical goals, or shared expectations about not just the specific parameters of sound parameters that need to be played, but the musical idea that should be communicated. And I'm not too sure how to go about putting this into such a score. I think that would be complicated, but I suppose one example is having a score that learns over time. Learns from the same person who's playing with it over time. And in this way, the score would start to share the predictions of the person and kind of mimic their personal style of playing the piece. And this would take us kind of to the next level of togetherness, but there's still more above that, because this is then a system that is not offering anything of its own. A system that's entirely following the person that it's playing with, but it's not showing that it is itself creative, that it can lead, that it can take the lead, it can offer anything on its own, and that the things that it can offer are sensible in the context of the performance. So I think there were a few examples in the book of some of the digital scores that you analyzed, where the score did offer something, but it was not always obvious. It was not always intended to be obvious to the person who's playing with the score what was the motive behind those particular decisions. And so this is interesting, and it kind of probably creates a sense of playfulness in some cases. But I think it presents some degree of challenge to the idea of musical togetherness.
I also like the fact that you mentioned it being a temporal relationship, that actually there is some time given to the musician and the human musician and the digital score agent, entity, whatever you want to call it, to spend time together, to learn from each other and through each other. And for that to be a really helpful, useful way of building trust, sense of trustworthiness into its creative decisions, so that you can be familiar, find meaning in its actions, but also contribute to developing its actions, and therefore, hopefully find togetherness through that.
Yeah, I think this is really important, actually, because this is something that people need.
Yeah.
People, they need some time in the short term to figure out what each other is about and how they are going to approach this piece. And they can benefit from much longer periods of time playing together, playing different things together, and learning each other's style. And so if we create digital scores that kind of are expected to behave like people, or behave like responsive and predicting people, but don't have this exposure to the people that they're playing with, you can't really expect that they're going to do that well. Although I would also point out one of the things that I think digital scores can do to promote togetherness is actually playing on the natural musicality of people. And in this way, they make themselves, I guess, a bit more predictable. They sort of establish shared expectations about how the performance should be approached, which don't need to be discussed, because you can assume that the people will will naturally follow them.
Yeah. We're hurtling very quickly towards the 30 minutes, which we set ourselves. It's not a long time, is it?
No, it's not.
I'm aware that you also had some other points that you wanted to make. I just wondered if you wished to make them now, or maybe we've already covered them, and then we can discuss them at the round table later. It feels like I need to pop over to Oslo at some point, and we just need to sit down and kind of go, right, what can we do? I've got 3 years left of this project. You've posed some extremely interesting questions that are harmonically, kind of supporting what I'm trying to achieve with my scores. And it'd just be really great to be able to do it properly, and to be able to measure and assess, and to dig deep and find an opportunity to get you into there. But enough of that. What might you want to say? What do you want to say, Tissa's final bits?
So I would say actually what I wanted to talk about at the end, we've kind of covered a little bit of this as we go along. What I wanted to do is talk a little bit about what the challenges are for digital scores in terms of trying to create experiences of togetherness, and also kind of what opportunities digital scores can offer in terms of promoting togetherness, even in cases where it might be suffering a bit.
Do you want to give us those, and I'll keep quiet, and then you can just present them, and
well,
you can talk about them.
So we've covered some of these things in terms of the challenges that I think digital scores face, or the people who design digital scores are facing. One of the things we have not talked too much about is attention. And I think in the case of some of the digital scores that you described in your book, they're placing a lot of demands on people's attention, and different attention of different modalities. So maybe there's a lot visually to monitor, in addition to trying to keep on top of the music that's being played. And we know for sure from for example, classical ensembles, if they have a piece of paper, a music score that they are looking at, if they need to look at the score, they're a lot less focused on each other and the music than once they've played it and they know it, and they're not so glued to the score. And so this is one thing that I think is challenging. And also some of the points that we brought up earlier, for example, about being able to segregate your own part of the music from other people's parts of the music, or the score's part of the music. If this is difficult, this is more demands on attention. And so this is getting in the way of people being able to focus really on the product or the process, and experience this togetherness. I'm trying to decide what to say in the last couple of minutes. Probably in terms of kind of building on the comment that you made, one of the things that I think is fantastic about digital scores is that it really offers us a chance to test some of these ideas and some of the hypotheses that I have about togetherness and how it develops, and in what circumstances, and what are the constraints, and so forth. And digital scores are useful for many reasons, I think, along these lines. But for one thing, you can kind of control them, and you can manipulate them in a systematic way that cannot be done with people. And for me, since many of these ideas have come from my research, which is focusing a lot on classical ensembles, and this is also a bit of a bias in the literature, because digital scores are intended to break many of these patterns intentionally. This is very explicitly testing some of these assumptions that we have.
Yeah, and I think you're, well, thank you for being so positive and supportive of the research, and finding such wonderful insights from the book. I think the digital score works really well with this, because it's a contained musical idea rather than an open environment for exploration. So the variability and the variables can change, and you can hone in onto specific modes of interactivity or modes of presence and liveness within the single context, and then create another one to change a few of those variables, and you have kind of like, a nice laboratory platform for testing different approaches.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we're just over the half an hour. Let's stop it there.
Okay.
So Laura, I just want to say an absolute massive thank you. It's been illuminating. I really do appreciate it. Let me just stop
Thank you as
recording.
well. This has been enjoyable.